Let's read this morning from Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35. Matthew 18, 21 through 35. And I need to put my glasses on. I might not be reading Matthew 18, 21 through 35. Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. So the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. But when that same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, and seizing him, he began to choke him, saying, Pay what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, Have patience with me, and I will pay you. He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Then his master summoned him and said to him, You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me, and should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And in anger his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Please be seated.
Kelly, thank you for reading that parable this morning. I'm not going to preach a better sermon than the one that Jesus preached there in Matthew 18. I hope you spend some time this week in that chapter. Regardless of what you get out of this lesson, I hope you spend some time with Jesus this week listening to that story as you read it. That parable is convicting on so many levels. We're making a transition this week. Those of you who are following along this one-word study, we're moving out of those that compiled the book. We're moving out of what they described as big picture words, and we're moving into a section, maybe 7 or 8 words that they're calling Christian character words. But most of you know that there's a difference between your reputation and your character. Reputation is what people think you are. Character is what you really are. I know in my life that it is easy to manage my reputation, to very carefully behave in a way that people hopefully will see me in a certain way, the way I want them to see me. And I think that's easier than doing the really difficult work of changing who I am, dealing with my character, dealing with what's going on inside of me. I think it's easier to maintain a reputation than it is to change your character. Following Jesus means that we become like Him. I think it's one of the greatest challenges of our faith is to be like Jesus. For our character to be transformed so that others can see a positive reflection of Jesus in the way that we think, speak, and act, especially in the way that we interact with others and the way that we treat other people. Our word for the week, it's already on the screen there. You can see it, mercy. That's why we read that parable of the unmerciful servant. It's a story that challenges us with a graphic reminder first. What is the first lesson that Jesus teaches us in this great parable? First, it teaches us of God's mercy toward us. Here's a guy that can't pay his debt. And the master in the story, I mean, he can throw the man, his family, into prison, but the master is merciful to him. This is God's mercy toward us. It reminds us next of the response His mercy should produce in us. Forgiven people should be forgiving people. Those who are recipients of mercy should be merciful. And really, then finally, the tragic consequences of failing to share that mercy with others. That's a quick summary. At the end of the parable, the master asks the unmerciful servant this question. Shouldn't you have been merciful? Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? Jesus put those words, Jesus is telling the story. He put those words in the master's mouth. Jesus didn't ask that question anticipating an answer. What he was doing in asking that question is he was making a statement. He asked the question to make a point. Those who have received God's mercy should be the most willing to show mercy to others. Listen, mercy should become a permanent part of our character. Our lesson this morning isn't going to come from Matthew 18. If you want to turn to the Old Testament book of 1 Samuel, somewhere around chapter 18, we're going to pick up around there. Eventually, we're going to end up in chapter 24. Most of what we want to think about this morning will come from 1 Samuel chapter 24. We're going to look at David's relationship with Saul. It's a powerful example of mercy. And as we consider that relationship and David's example, it's one that I hope all of us will imitate. Sometimes we see examples in Scripture, and God is sharing these examples because He doesn't want us to be like the people that we read about. And sometimes He shares these examples because He wants us to be just like the people that we read about. And in this story, I believe God is giving us an example that He wants us to imitate. We know that David, one of his claim to fame, he goes down into the valley and he fights Goliath. And after that great victory, he becomes a prominent personality in Israel. He marries Michal. This is the king's daughter. He becomes the king's son-in-law. He forms a deep friendship with Saul's son Jonathan. 1 Samuel 18 and verse 1, this is a description of how close their relationship was. It says, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. Jonathan loved him as his own soul. When I talk about David growing to a position of prominence, he marries the king's daughter. He has a friendship with the king's son. Jonathan loved David like he loved his own soul. He loved David more than he loved himself. David is a trusted soldier in Saul's army. 1 Samuel 18 and verse 5, Saul set him over the men of war. He was accepted in the sight of all the people and accepted in the sight of Saul's servants. People knew David. Coming and going, they knew who he was. He was a soldier in the army of the king. He was well known by the people. He was known in the household of Saul, accepted by Saul's servants. You know, ego ruins a lot of good things. Pride destroys a lot of good things. Jealousy ruins. Otherwise, healthy relationships. Here you have two men that seem to be getting along wonderfully well until one becomes jealous of the other. They've gone out on a military campaign. They come back. Everything's been successful. Women come out of the city. They're dancing and singing. And Saul hears what they're singing. 1 Samuel 18 and verse 7. The song that they're singing is that Saul has slain his thousands. Saul's the king. He's slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Verse 8 tells us Saul was very angry. There's a word in the original language. It actually has the idea of to burn. Man, that just burnt him up. He heard what they were singing. David's the shepherd boy. David came and played the harp for me. David's not the king, I'm the king. He heard what they were singing and he became so angry and displeased. They've ascribed to David tens of thousands. To me, they've ascribed only thousands. What else could he get but the kingdom? And from that point on, his attitude towards David started to change. He starts to act out violently against him. You remember, he throws a spear at him. Can you imagine? This is a man that you have served. You're married to his daughter. You're in a close friendship with his son. You're welcomed in his home. You've been there before, and in a fit of rage, he tries to kill you. Saul sent messengers to David's house. This is 1 Samuel 19 and verse 12. They were there to watch him and to kill him. They were keeping an eye on him. They wanted to follow him, know where he was, and when they had the opportunity, they were going to kill him. He escapes out the window of his bedroom. He got away, and after that, he's forced to become a fugitive in the wilderness. He's constantly on the move because Saul is dogging his every step, looking for an opportunity to kill him. When we get to 1 Samuel 24, David has a following. By this time, he's got a little group, of about 600 men that are devoted to him, and they've taken refuge among the rocks and the caves of En-Gedi. David's hiding. David, again, has been chased all over the place. Saul comes out after him. He's got the army with him, the army of Israel. And it's in one of these caves that David's character is tested and mercy prevailed. This is one of the stories in David's life that is a highlight of his life. It's an example where we see him setting a model that God wants all of us to follow. We're looking at verse 3. The he here is King Saul. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. Here's a man who's used his position of authority to hound David, to make his life miserable. He's been chasing him all over the countryside, trying to hunt him down and kill him. He's wandered into a cave to use the bathroom. And who's hiding at the back of the cave except David and all of his men? I want you to think about that scenario, and I want you to think about this question. What would you do in David's position? What would you do if the person who has caused you the most heartache and the most pain was vulnerable? If you found them in an unprotected, a moment of real vulnerability, what would you do? Charles Swindoll said, if you ever want to test the carnality of a person, ask him or her, what should you do when your enemy is vulnerable? And he says, unless they're men or women of God, they're going to tell you to strike every time. The mindset of the world is to strike back. That the mindset of the world is to hurt the people that hurt you. And that's what David's men wanted him to do. That's what they encouraged him to do. In verse 4, they said, this is the day the Lord spoke of, when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands and for you to deal with him as you wish. They're saying to him, David, don't you understand? Now is your opportunity. He doesn't even know we're here. Get him. I mean, this is the opportunity. Don't waste it. Don't let him get away. Pay him back. David, everything he's been doing to you, get him. Do not let him leave this cave alive. Now, they're not saying all of that. I'm telling you, that's the gist of the text. Are you crazy? I mean, why would you waste an opportunity to hurt somebody who has done so much to harm you? They invoke the will of God. They're trying to convince David that it wasn't an accident that Saul walked into that cave. Listen, people will do that. They'll tell you, don't you think maybe God's hand is at work here? That even God wants you to strike out against the people that have struck out against you. You know what David does? he refuses to harm Saul. He cuts off a corner of Saul's robe in verse 5 of that chapter. So even that small act caused him to feel conscience-stricken. He regretted that he did it. Think of the restraint. Think of the self-control. Because not only did David refuse to take advantage of Saul's vulnerability, he prevented those who were loyal to him from doing anything to Saul. It actually says he rebuked them sharply and did not allow them to attack Saul. Could you, if you were in that cave, could you hear, David, get him. Now's your chance. He's right there. He doesn't even know we're here. And David say, I'm not going to do it. Well, if you won't, if you're not going to do anything about it, we will. If you don't get him, we'll get him. And David is harshly rebuking them. He won't strike Saul. He won't let them attack him either. After Saul left the cave, David calls out to him. This is verses 10 and 11. This day you've seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. Look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but I didn't kill you. Can you imagine that scene? He's been looking for David. He's been, he hears reports. We hear he's over in this region of Israel. They've moved now. They're over, and Saul is just looking for him. He's tracking him from one place to another. It seems like on some occasions David just barely gets away. Saul and his army is on this side of a hill, and David and his army, they're on the other side. And now here I am, and he says, Saul, I want you to do something. I want you to look at the corner of your robe. Do you see the part that's missing? I've got it right here. It's in my hand. I could have killed you. Everything you've done to me, the way you've treated me, after all my kindness to you, all of my faithfulness, all of my loyalty to you, and everything you've done to me, and I had you in my hands. This little piece of your robe testifies you were as good as dead, but I didn't take your life. The idea that you have about me, that I'm a threat to you, is a wrong idea. I'm not your enemy. I'm not the one harming you. You're the one trying to harm me. The response part I want to read in verses 16 through 19. When David finished saying this, Saul says, "Is that your voice, David?" He calls him my son. There was a point in this relationship where Saul took David from his father's house, and he really didn't let him go back home anymore. David came to live and dwell in the presence of the king. This mercy that David shows to a man that's trying to kill him is so unusual, so unexpected, so undeserved. The king wept. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You treated me well, but I've treated you badly." Listen, I want to stop on that point. You treated me well, I treated you badly. You have been good to me, I've been bad to you. I've been bad to you, but you've been good to me. That's what he's saying. You returned good for evil, and I returned evil for good. You're better. You're more righteous than I am. You just now told me about the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you didn't kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. Saul's right. What Saul said there is the truth. He gave an accurate assessment of the world. Worldly people do not allow their enemies to get away unharmed. When they have an opportunity to hurt those who have harmed them, they take it. But church, we're not like the world. We don't think like the world thinks, and we don't act like the world acts. We take our lead from God. We live by a higher standard. When God's mercy went to work in your life, it changed the way you deal with pain. When His mercy went to work in our lives, it changed the way that we deal with people who cause pain. We no longer try to overcome evil with evil. Now we overcome evil with good. It's interesting what Saul says next, and I think we see a continuation of mercy. First, he says, I know that you will surely be king, that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your name. My dynasty is going to end. And your family and your dynasty is going to begin. God is going to take the kingdom from my family, and He's going to give it to you, and He's going to give it to your family. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not kill off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family. They're living in a time when a dynasty is overthrown that the new regime would exterminate everyone from the old regime. And I know that word exterminate is so offensive, but that's what they did. They killed everybody in the family of the previous ruler. It was a way of protecting their authority. It was a way of preventing the possibility of anyone building a rebellion around a descendant of the former king. Here we found someone who is related to Saul, a son, a grandson, and we're going to rally around him, and we're going to rival David's authority. And so what they would do is they would just kill everybody related to the former king. And Saul is saying, David, please don't do that to my family. And at the end of that chapter, or in verse 22, it just says, David gave his oath to Saul, and he kept his word. Later, he's going to be looking for descendants of Saul and Jonathan to show kindness to them. What are the lessons? We walk into this cave in En-Gedi. What are the lessons from the cave? Number one, David was unjustly persecuted, and there's a possibility for that to happen to all of us. There's a possibility for other people to use their position of influence against us to hurt us. David's friends encouraged him to retaliate, and I would say it wouldn't be all that unusual when someone is hurting you, for the people that care about you, to say, look, you got to defend yourself. You got to stand up against this person. If they hit you, you got to hit them back. I'm sure that is something that his friends did and something our friends will tend to do. They will encourage retaliation. They will not understand mercy. But finally, we see David chose mercy instead of revenge, and I believe that's what God is calling all of us to do. At some point in our lives, most of us are going to be confronted with the desire to retaliate. Someone's going to give us a reason to feel like striking back. Someone we trust will hurt us, we'll be tempted to hurt them back. And listen, there could be people right here already this morning who are in a situation like that. You're not waiting for it to come, wondering what will I do when something like this happens to me. It's your present reality. You're already in a situation like that. It might be with an employer who promised you a raise that never came through. It might be with a mate who walked away when you needed him or her the most. It might be your mom and dad. Either they failed to be there for you, or the issue isn't that they weren't there. The issue is that they needed to be there to protect you. Not only did they not protect you, it was your own mom and dad that inflicted the pain that you're living with right now. It could be a friend that you entrusted with a secret and they told everybody. They violated your trust and they passed it on to others. It could be a teacher that didn't give you the grade that you deserved, a co-worker who's spreading lies about you. It could be a brother or sister that cheated you out of your share of the inheritance. Listen, I'm just trying to give you some examples, and I think those things are real. If you're resentful, you have a reason to feel resentful. Someone has treated you wrong. You're looking for an opportunity to retaliate. I want you to think about the fact that this story that we're reading this morning, David's story, does not end in the wilderness of En-Gedi. I'll bet 99% of the Bible students here this morning, when they think of David, they don't think about the cave in the wilderness. I'll bet most of us think about the rooftop and the palace in Jerusalem. We don't tend to think about the time that David spared the life of an enemy. Most of us think about the time he took the life of a friend. He's up on the rooftop. He sees a woman bathing. He inquires, who is she? He finds out she's married. Her husband is Uriah the Hittite. Uriah the Hittite's one of his soldiers. He fights under David's command. David's king. David has all authority in the kingdom over the military. This is a man who's serving under David's command. And we have enough detail from this story to know that this man was faithful, that this man was loyal. He was a man of integrity. He was a man who did right. David has the affair with his wife. He can't deceive him. Look, you can look at this any way you want. He puts a letter in Uriah's hands. Uriah delivers it. It's basically a letter to the captain of the army. Joab, put him where the fighting is the fiercest. Withdraw from him. It is David's fault that Uriah died. He killed him. He has this man's blood on his hands. And if you wonder how he felt about that, the guilt, the burden of guilt, how it was eating away at him, read the early verses of Psalm 32. It was weighing heavy on him. Now think about the person who has hurt you. Think about the desire that you have to retaliate. And before you do, I want you to remember these words that David prayed in Psalm 51 when he's crying out. He's praying to God. And his prayer is, have mercy on me, O God. Have mercy on me according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion. Blot out my transgression. God, have mercy on me. We start out this morning, we're saying, look, God's been merciful to you. Because God's been merciful to you, you need to be merciful to others. You're a recipient of mercy. You need to share mercy. Now we reverse it. If you think that you're going to live perfectly the rest of your life and you won't ever need God's mercy again, first of all, you're deceived. But listen, there's going to come a time when you need mercy again. And if that time ever comes when you need mercy again, you better show it. You better show it. Sermon on the Mount, we call them the Beatitudes. What's Jesus saying here? Matthew 5 and verse 7, blessed are the merciful, they will be shown mercy. Who is going to be shown mercy? I don't think this is hard to understand. If you want to be a person that stands before the judgment seat of Christ and is shown mercy, you better show mercy. You better be merciful. Jesus said there's a blessing in being merciful, because if you're merciful, you're going to be shown mercy. James runs at this a little different. Same idea, but the way he words it is a little different. In James 2:13, judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. I don't want to be shown judgment without mercy. You don't want to be shown judgment without mercy. Listen, if that's what you want to avoid, look who's going to be judged without mercy. Those who haven't been merciful. What's God telling us? We should be merciful because we've received mercy. And we should continue to be merciful because we'll need it again. We're going to need it again in the future. We're going to be like David in Psalm 51, have mercy on me. We're going to be like that tax collector in one of Jesus' parables that wouldn't even lift up his eyes to heaven but just beat his chest and cried out, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. You want God to answer that? You want God to say yes as you appeal to Him in your darkest moment when you failed? I mean, you're at your absolute worst and you're crying out for mercy. God, have mercy on me. Then we need to be merciful to the people in our lives who've sinned against us. And I'll just be honest with you, that's where the sermon was going to end. But I was driving down the street the other day. Maybe you're thinking like I think. I think it was a 7-Eleven that went out. Every time I see an empty building, I know what's going in there. 99% of the time, what's going in there? A dispensary. And I saw that word, and I started thinking about it. You see these little green signs popping up everywhere, right? If there's an opening, they're going to move one of these in. They're going to have a dispensary. Here's my invitation to you this morning. Be a dispensary. They ought to be popping up all over the place. They ought to be popping up everywhere Christians live. Dispensary of mercy. When there are poor people and hungry people, they should come to us. Not, that sign, that green, that's plus, and that people know what that is. People see a cross, they ought to know what that is. There's a cross on that building. Those people deal in mercy. Those people are merciful. When people are totally broken by the sin in their lives, they should come to us for mercy. When they're enslaved by habits they can't get free, they should know they can come to us and find mercy. When their marriage is falling apart, they don't know what to do, they should come to us for mercy. Church, when they come to us and we help them, and then listen, and this happens, they repay our good with evil, they sin against us. How did Jesus say it? Think, you know this happens. They come and we're merciful. They repay our good with evil, and they sin against us. Jesus said up to 7 times 70. To the point any normal person would close the door to forgiveness. And when they come back again, we should keep the door of mercy open because we're recipients of God's mercy, and we're determined that we're going to be merciful to others. That's my invitation this morning. Everywhere you go this week, be a dispensary of mercy. When you go home this afternoon, be a dispensary of mercy to your spouse, to your children, to your parents. When you go to work tomorrow, be a dispensary of mercy to your boss, to your coworkers, and to your customers. When you go to school, you be a dispensary of mercy to the administration and to the teachers and to the students and to the parents. And listen, everywhere you go this week, if you go to a restaurant after church this morning, the person who's bringing you your food, you be a dispensary of mercy. That's who we are. If you walked in here this morning looking for mercy, you came to the right place. In Ephesians 2, we're told that God is rich in mercy. He's got plenty to go around. And if you need the mercy of God, we invite you to come to Him this morning as we stand and sing.